We've just had the US and China trade agreement that was announced after 2 days of bargaining in Geneva. Now, a lot of people were quite surprised at the speed at which this agreement was made. Of course, Trump supporters are claiming China caved, but from the outside, it is hard to see what Trump achieved with this for his base. Can you help us unpack what happened and what the significance of this is?
Well, I'm actually surprised too, but after witnessing the Trump supporter reaction, I'm thinking Trump should have caved much earlier. Like it doesn't matter what he do, his supporters will spin this as a win anyway. He has nothing to lose. Basically, China got everything it wanted. China's Commerce Ministry have said going into the talk, they said, okay, we're open to talk, but provided it must be on an equal basis, based on mutual respect and all the unilateral tariffs that was imposed since the Liberation Day must be canceled. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, Trump rolled all the way back to before April 2nd, the so-called Liberation Day. So now we have, China and US basically kept 10% tariff on each other for appearances. And in addition, Trump kept the 20% so-called fentanyl tariff that he imposed before April 2nd, before the Liberation Day announcement. So what's all this 1 month of absolute chaos in supply chain all about? What did Trump accomplish? I mean, in terms of China, they accomplished a lot. It showed the world that United States is not a serious country. But on the other hand, China has come across as a global leader. China is the one that pushed back and got Trump to back down. And on top of that, you also show who really have all the cards because the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he keep on saying, "Oh, we got all the cards." As a consumer nation, as a nation that runs trade deficit, we have the power. We're in the position of power because Chinese they cannot live without us. They need our money, and it turns out that's not true because China has been prepared for this moment. I would say even from the first Trump term, because that's when the sanction on China really started back in 2017, 2018. Back then, it was a rude awakening for China, a lot of business people in China, because they didn't expect that to happen. And then, you have the arrest of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, who is a daughter of Huawei's founder. She was detained by Canada on behest of the United States for quote unquote sanction busting on Washington's sanction on Iran. So supposedly Huawei provided the telecom service to Iran. I mean, that's a big shock. That's a big shock moment for China, business community in China. And that's when they realized, Washington is no longer a reliable trading partner. And Biden, when he came to office, he just doubled down on the Trump first term policies. So China, since 2018, they have been trying to decouple and de-risk from the United States. They did that by trying to open new markets, sell to countries outside of global North countries. They particularly expand their trade links with the global South. So today, even before the Liberation Day announcement, so-called Liberation Day announcement, United States is no longer the largest trading partner of China. United States is number three. Now, United States came number three. The top trading partner with China is ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Countries. Number two is European Union. United States is number three. So when Scott Bessent acting like China cannot live without United States, that's totally false. Because first of all, China has developed its own consumer economy. Today, Chinese middle class has a number of around 400 million. China has a bigger middle class than the entire population of United States combined. And just to give you an idea what that means, China is the world's largest market for cars. They sell 30 million vehicles in China every year, and that's twice the number of United States. The US is only the world's second largest auto market today. This is why when the so-called Liberation Day came around, Xi Jinping did not pick up the call. Instead, he went to travel through Southeast Asia because those are the China's top trading partner now. And one part of that is what they so-called transshipment. So what happened is because of the pressure by US for countries and multinationals to decouple the supply chain from China, many of them have moved operation to Southeast Asia, even in the years prior, particularly to places like Vietnam, Indonesia, etc. One is because the wage has been rising in China. So more labor intensive operations are being pushed out. And two is because the Washington's push for decoupling. But the reason many businesses chose Vietnam is actually because Vietnam's proximity to China, because Vietnam is closest to all the existing Chinese supply chain. So even though some manufacturers, the final assembly is moving to Vietnam, but you're still dependent on Chinese machine parts, Chinese components. So essentially, the Chinese supply chain got expanded, got pushed out to the rest of Southeast Asia. And the Southeast Asian economies are now even more tightly intertwined with Chinese economy. That's what the US policy has brought. And that is why when Xi Jinping traveled to Vietnam and traveled to Malaysia, he got red carpet treatment. And you have People's Liberation Army honor guards marching through the streets of Vietnam, and the women were calling them husbands from the sidelines. I mean, this is Vietnam. This is a country that some people in Washington was hoping to turn into a cornerstone to contain China. And like these countries already made their position very plain. They realize their future lies with China. And on the other hand, while China has been preparing for the last 8 years to decouple and de-risk from the United States, Trump apparently has no plans. I mean, he thinks their tariff is some kind of magical bullet who will fix all the problems. And it's like I like to use analogy. Well, United States we know has been hollowing out its industry for 40 years. The Wall Street has been offsourcing manufacturing to East Asia since 1970s, before China even opened up. And it has reached to the point that tariff would help your manufacturing if you have manufacturing. Right now, US don't have manufacturing anymore. I mean, it gotten so bad where now even Pentagon has given up on producing in United States. I like to say the only thing US produce anymore is weapons and OnlyFans. And apparently that's not even true anymore because Pentagon is now going to South Korea, Japan, and Turkey for help with the naval buildup against China because US only had three shipyards that is capable of producing warship at the moment. And the Pentagon admits China has 200 times the shipbuilding capability than the United States. So right now, Pentagon is even give up on bring manufacturing back home and going to other countries to build warships. US actually has a law that specifically prohibits to build warships in foreign countries. But Pentagon and Congress are now working to skirt this legislation to have US warship being retrofitted in the shipyard of South Korea because it will be much cheaper to do. So in this kind of environment, tariff is not going to help. Tariff is not going to help because you have to build the entire supply chain from ground up. And that's not a couple month efforts. That's not like 90 days. You can't do that in 90 days. You cannot do that in a couple months. You cannot even do it in several years. It's like a decade long process. I mean, it took China 40 years to get to where they are. It took 40 years to build up the infrastructure, educate their population, and to finally build a ecosystem where they produce everything. For United States to reproduce that, it's a multi-generation effort. But US politicians they don't they don't plan out that far. I mean, all they care about is like the next election cycle, right? And the same with the Wall Street. They only look at quarterly earning reports. A multi-generation effort, what are you talking about? That's not going to happen. This is why the Trump approach is okay, we'll just raise the tariff so high. We're going to basically cut off our trade with China, so we have to produce in United States. But what the hell are you going to do in the meantime before you can rebuild your manufacturing base and rebuild your supply chain? You are basically embargoing yourself. I mean, like, if China had imposed a trade embargo like before the Liberation Day announcement, this would be considered an act of war. But Trump's like, no worry, we'll do it to ourselves. Let's just impose an embargo on all Chinese goods coming to the United States. And this is why the market panicked. More than $1 trillion got wiped out from the stock market after the Liberation Day announcement was made. And this is because all the businesses know this is crazy, this is unsustainable. And we had just before the trade talk that was wrapped up, the director of Port of Los Angeles, the largest port in the United States, they said they saw a 35% drop in container traffic coming to the port of Los Angeles. And it was only going to get worse. And, like prices were already rising in the United States. And this hasn't even really hit the US consumer yet because when the US consumer were making their purchases on Amazon, they were still purchasing like the inventory that was built up by Amazon for like pre-tariff announcement because all these businesses has been building out their warehouses in anticipation of the tariff. So they built a large stockpile, and when they build a stockpile, they have to pay more warehousing fees. Guess where the warehousing fee, the additional costs get passed on, get passed on consumers. That's why the price already start rising. And then that's not the worst. If the trade war had dragged on, by June, July, we would see shortages. We will have empty shelves. I think this is what really pressured the Trump administration to basically buckle and cave because they realize it's going to be really, really bad. If they act right now, at least they can maybe save the back to school sales, maybe. Even with the announcement of the 90-day pause, the damage is already done to the supply chain because even if the Chinese supplier says, okay, let bygone be bygones, let's just go back to business as normal. If they ship the loads of ships today in China, guess what? It takes anywhere from 20 to 30 days to cross the Pacific. And by the time all these ships come to Port of Los Angeles, you're going to have a major traffic jam, right? Because all these ports are designed for smooth flow of goods. They're not designed for this kind of big pulse of goods coming in at one go. So the supply chain is already FUBAR for next month or two. But more importantly, it's a damage to the reputation of United States all around the world. And now after Trump slapped tariff against everybody, people realize, holy crap, like you can't do business with countries like that. And business hate most is uncertainty. And Trump just throw a lot of uncertainty into this equation. So, for example, after the tariff announcement, if there are some people said, okay, well, now I guess we have to build in United States right now to avoid the tariff, and then make a big investment in US. And now suddenly there's a big rollback. All your investment just poof, just gone in the drain. I mean, that's terrible. And also all the big businesses like Walmart, Amazon, they might be able to eat the temporary disruption. They might eat the loss. But a lot of the small, medium businesses are getting wiped out because their margin is thin to begin with. And they also, a lot of times, do not have like 5 to 7 weeks of inventory because, they were trying to be lean operations.
Even Walmart, has just announced that they will be rising prices because they're claiming that they also have small margins. So, so it's affecting all. And then the other thing I was thinking about as you were speaking, which absolutely supports your points, is recently the Qatar Air Force One plane that Trump is supposed to be getting from Qatar. Apparently, that's because Boeing would take 5 years to make make a plane for him. So again, like you're saying, it's just proof, isn't it, that the manufacturing is just not in the US at the moment.